The first thing the slow formation of loess in the Loess Plateau gives you is the faint, dry scent of silt, warm stone, and wind-smoothed earth beneath your hands. Settle here with me and let the day loosen its hold. You are standing at the edge of a yellow-brown slope where the ground seems soft from a distance, though it holds the memory of ages in its quiet layers. The light is low across the Loess Plateau, and it moves gently over terraces, gullies, and rounded hills that look almost poured into place. You can feel the air carrying a little dust against your skin. It is not harsh. It is only the earth breathing slowly, as it has done through cold ages, dry seasons, and patient winds. We begin with almost nothing, just a single grain too small to notice. It may have once been stone under ice, rubbed finer and finer by a glacier far away. It may have rested on a dry riverbed, pale and weightless, waiting for weather to lift it. Then the wind came softly enough to be invisible, and the grain rose. You can picture it drifting over open country, not rushing, not falling yet, only held inside the moving air. Around it, many other grains travel in the same hushed stream. They are mostly silt, finer than sand, heavier than clay, just the right size to be carried and then released. Over time, this is how the Loess Plateau gathers itself. The wind slows where land rises, where grasses tremble, where uneven ground breaks the current into gentler eddies. A grain settles there, then another, then more than you could count. They come down like a dry snowfall, so quiet that no one standing here would hear the beginning of a hill. Yet the hill begins anyway. As we stay with this first layer, you start to notice how soft the surface feels in the mind. Loess can stand in steep faces, but it begins as powder. It filters into hollows, wraps old slopes, and fills low places with pale dust. When you breathe slowly, you can almost imagine the scent of dry earth rising from it. The Loess Plateau is not a landscape made in one gesture. It is an accumulation of small arrivals, wind after wind, season after season, cold age after cold age. The beauty of it is that nothing needs to hurry, because the land is being shaped by repetition rather than force. You and I can let the surface quiet down now and look beneath it. Under the present soil, older loess rests in layered calm. Some layers are lighter and dustier, formed when climates were colder and drier. Others are darker, touched by old roots and warmer rains. The earth remembers both dryness and return. A pale band may tell of strong winter winds, when sparse plants could only catch a little of the passing dust. A deeper brown layer may tell of a milder interval, when grasses thickened and roots held moisture near the surface. These old soils are called paleosols, but we can think of them as pauses. The dust fell, then life softened it. When you place your attention on the slope, the layers feel almost like breaths. A dry breath leaves pale loess, a warmer breath leaves soil, then the wind returns again, and another pale blanket settles over what came before. This is not a straight line of time, it is a slow pulse. The air here can feel open and spacious, with the smell of dust, grass, and sun-warmed ground. Sound does not travel sharply across these hills. It seems absorbed by the soft walls of silt. Even your footsteps, if you imagine walking along a narrow path, would have a muted, powdery hush beneath them. The science is gentle enough to hold while falling asleep. Loess forms when fine mineral dust is made available, lifted by wind, carried across distance, and trapped by landforms or vegetation. In the Loess Plateau, much of that dust came from dry regions to the northwest and from sediments exposed by rivers and ancient cold climates. The wind did the carrying, the plateau did the receiving. Over immense stretches of time, the receiving became depth. In some places, loess deposits grew very thick, creating broad uplands and steep-sided gullies. Rain later carved into the soft material, cutting channels through it like slow fingers through flour. Yet even those gullies belong to the same quiet story, because water and wind keep taking turns. We do not need to follow every grain at once. It is enough to stay with one. It settles into a tiny space between other grains, with air still held between them. Loess is often porous, filled with minute openings, and that gives it a lightness you can almost feel. It is earth with breath inside it. That breath matters. Rain can move through the tiny pores. Roots can enter. Minerals can shift slowly. In time, the fresh dust becomes soil, and the soil becomes part of a living surface. The plateau is not only a record of wind, it is a place where wind-blown stone becomes ground for roots, grasses, shrubs, and fields. As we drift deeper into the making of the Loess Plateau, the wind becomes older around us, and the surface under your feet becomes only the newest page of a much thicker book. Below the newest surface, the Loess Plateau holds many older surfaces, each one once open to sky and weather. You can imagine us moving downward without digging, as though the hill has become clear enough to see through. The fresh smell of dry grass fades behind us. The scent becomes more mineral, more enclosed, like cool dust resting in shade. Here, the loess is not just a substance, but a kind of slow archive. Each layer has the texture of wind saved in earth. Some bands are pale and loose, the color of faded straw. Others are warmer, brownish, touched by ancient roots and rains. You can almost feel the difference with your fingertips. One layer soft and powdery, another slightly firmer, as if it once held more life. We keep descending through time, and the Loess Plateau becomes quieter around us. The surface gullies and ridges are still there above, but now they seem far away. Around you, the walls are made of fine grains pressed gently together. Nothing here feels sudden. Even the weight of the hill above us feels like a blanket, not a burden. The dust that became Loess needed a source, and we can let our thoughts drift outward, towards those distant places. Far beyond the plateau, cold climates once exposed wide plains of sediment. Rivers shifted across open beds. Glacial grinding made minerals fine enough for the air to carry. Dry winds found those loose grains and lifted them into motion. You do not have to picture a storm. Sometimes the movement was broad and persistent, with countless small particles held in a pale veil. The air may have tasted dry and chalky. Light would have softened inside it. The horizon would have blurred. A grain of quartz, feldspar, mica, or carbonate might have traveled for hours, days or longer before coming to rest. When that wind reached the Loess Plateau, the land offered small interruptions. Slopes rose, grasses bent, shrubs held still pockets of air near their stems. Each interruption helped the drifting silt fall out of suspension. A single plant could gather dust around its base, and a hillside of plants could begin to thicken the land itself. You can feel how gentle that mechanism is. There is no need for a sharp edge or a violent beginning. The grains simply lose enough speed to settle. They land on older grains, in small shadows, along roots, behind stones, in hollows where the wind pauses. Little by little, the plateau receives what the air has been carrying, and as we sink further into the older dust, the Loess Plateau begins to show us how climate speaks without raising its voice. Cold, dry periods often brought more dust. Warmer, wetter periods allowed soils to form. The alternation made bands, and the bands made memory. We are moving through that memory now. In the colder layers, you might imagine sparse vegetation under a pale sky. The ground would have been open enough for dust to move easily. Winter winds could cross wide distances. Fine particles would arrive again and again, covering the surface in a yellowish film. Beneath your imagined hand, that fresh loess would feel dry, silky, and almost weightless. During milder times, the land breathed differently. Rain reached the surface more often. Roots pushed into the upper layer. Tiny soil organisms moved in darkness. Minerals weathered and changed. The color deepened. If you could smell that old surface when it was alive, it might carry a faint scent of damp earth after light rain. Those darker layers are not interruptions in the story. They are part of the formation itself. The Loess Plateau did not merely accumulate dust and remain unchanged. It received dust, then allowed it to become soil, then received more dust again. You and I can rest inside that rhythm, where the land alternates between falling particles and quiet growth. The grains are small, but they are not all the same. Some are angular, with edges left from the breaking of rock. Some are coated with minerals that give loess its warm color. Many are just the right size to make the deposit stand in vertical faces because their arrangement allows strength as well as softness. The result is a landscape that looks tender and yet holds shape. You may have seen cliffs of Loess in your mind now, rising with smooth yellow walls. They can look almost carved from packed flour. Narrow ravines cut through them. Terraces step across the slopes. In the evening light, the walls glow softly, and shadows gather in the gullies like cool water. The Loess Plateau feels both open and inward at once. As the wind continues above us in memory, we move deeper into the way Loess changes after it lands. Fresh dust is never the end. Rainwater seeps through it, carrying dissolved minerals downward. Carbonates can gather in small nodules. Clay can form or move. Roots leave channels. Burrowing animals and tiny organisms stir the surface in slow, delicate ways. You can imagine water entering after a summer shower. It does not rush at first. It darkens the top of the dust, beads along grains, then threads downward through tiny pores. The smell rises warm and earthy, as if the hill has opened one eye. The sound is quiet, perhaps only a soft patter above, while below, the moisture moves without noise. Over long periods, that wetting and drying gives structure to the soil. Grains cluster, open spaces shift. Iron minerals may change color as they weather. Organic matter darkens the upper part. The surface becomes more than sediment. It becomes a place where seeds can settle, roots can hold, and a living skin can cover wind-blown stone. In the Loess Plateau, this relationship between dust and life is especially intimate. Plants slow the wind and trap more dust. The trapped dust gives plants more ground to root in. Then the plants hold the surface, and the surface catches still more particles. We can feel the patience of that exchange, one quiet help answering another. Below this, the old soils become dimmer, and we enter a slower, cooler layer of the Loess Plateau, where the memory of grasses has thinned into color and texture. The air around us, if we imagine it, is still and powdered. The light is amber gray. Every sound seems padded by earth. Our descent is not downward through space alone, but through weather after weather. The plateau's shape comes partly from what was laid down, and partly from what was later taken away. Loess is easily cut by running water. Rain collects on slopes, finds weak lines, and begins to draw shallow rills. The rills deepen over time. They join other rills. Eventually, whole gullies open through the soft deposits, turning a once smoother surface into a folded and intricate terrain. This cutting can sound dramatic, but we can hold it gently. Imagine a light rain at first, tapping leaves and darkening dust. Then a thread of water gathers on the slope. It carries a faint cloud of silt. The water is yellow-brown and quiet at the edges. It follows gravity, not anger, and the land slowly yields a path. Season after season, those paths lengthen. Some become deep ravines with steep walls. Others widen into small valleys. The Loess Plateau is famous for this dissected form, where ridges and gullies repeat across great distances. From above, the land may look wrinkled, like cloth folded by patient hands. From within it, you would feel surrounded by warm earthen walls. When you stand in one of those gullies in the imagination, the sound changes. Wind above becomes softer. Footsteps make a muted crumble. Dry grasses brush against each other with a whispering sound. The walls hold the day's warmth, then release it slowly toward evening. Dust carries the scent of minerals, roots, and old rain. The gullies reveal the thickness of time. Their walls expose layer after layer, pale loess alternating with darker old soils. If we could pass a hand over the face of the wall, we might feel faint changes in firmness, grain, and color. Each band says that the world once leaned dry, then moist, then dry again. The message is simple and very old. You can rest with the idea that erosion is also a kind of reading. Water opens the book that wind wrote. The cut faces let us see what would otherwise remain hidden. The plateau is being shaped by loss, but the loss is not only disappearance, it is revelation, slow and grain by grain. And as we move deeper again, the Loess Plateau draws us away from the carved gullies and back into the falling dust that made them possible. We return to the air. We return to the dry wind. The surface above becomes open country again, wide and pale, with the sky carrying fine particles through afternoon light. There is a softness to this movement that belongs to distance. The grains do not travel alone in a neat line. They move in layers of air, lifted, dropped, and lifted again. Larger particles settle sooner. Finer ones can travel farther. The plateau receives a mixture sorted by wind strength, distance, and the shape of the land. This sorting is subtle, but over time, subtle things become visible. You may notice that Loess often blankets older topography. It can drape over hills and fill shallow depressions, smoothing what came before. In the Loess Plateau, this blanketing helped create broad upland surfaces before later erosion cut them apart. The land was softened first, then carved. It was covered, then opened. There is something deeply restful in that order. Covering comes before exposure. Silence comes before the channel. The dust falls like a long exhale across the land, and only later does water draw lines through it. We can let our breathing follow that pattern, filling and emptying slowly, without needing to arrive anywhere quickly. The mineral grains themselves carry histories older than the plateau. Quartz may have come from rocks that crystallized deep in the earth long before any Loess existed. Feldspar may slowly weather into clay. Mica may flash faintly if turned in light. Carbonate dust may dissolve and move with water. Each tiny particle is a remnant of another landscape. When you hold that thought gently, the Loess Plateau becomes a meeting place. Mountain, desert, riverbed, glacier, plain, and wind all gather here in powder form. The landscape is not isolated. It is made from distance. It is an inland sea of dust, settled and lifted and settled again, until it becomes a body of earth. The color is part of its calm. Loess often holds a yellow, buff, or light brown tone from minerals and weathering. In late afternoon, that color can become honeyed and quiet. Shadows in the gullies look blue-gray. Dry grass shines at the rim. The surface seems to glow from within, not brightly, but with the warmth of old dust held in low light. As we descend through another hidden band, the Loess Plateau invites us to think about time without counting it too sharply. Some layers may represent thousands of years. Some sequences reach back through many climate cycles. But for sleep, we do not need to measure each boundary. We only need to feel the scale, vast enough to loosen the mind. Imagine a night settling over the plateau. The day's wind fades. Fine dust that was moving in the air begins to fall. It lands on grass blades, on bare patches, on the rims of small cracks. The ground cools. The smell of dry earth becomes clearer. Above, stars appear through a thinning veil, and below, another almost invisible layer joins the land. No one grain changes the shape alone. This is important. The Loess Plateau is made by accumulation so gradual that a single moment seems almost empty. Yet the emptiness is full of work. If you return after a season, there may be a film. If you return after centuries, there is depth. If you return after ages, there is a plateau. You and I can let that patience sink into the body. There are changes that do not announce themselves. There are forms that grow by receiving. There are landscapes built not from one event, but from countless quiet arrivals. Loess is a lesson in being gathered slowly, without spectacle, until softness becomes a place. Below this old surface, the soil grows paler again, and we enter another dust-rich interval of the Loess Plateau. The imagined air feels colder now. Vegetation is thinner. The land beyond us is open, and wind has fewer obstacles. The particles move more freely, crossing distances with a dry, steady hush. Light filters through them like light through gauze. In cold, dry phases, glacial processes elsewhere could grind rock into fine mineral flour. Rivers carried sediment, then left it exposed on floodplains or dry beds. Deserts and sparsely vegetated regions offered loose material to the wind. The plateau laid downwind of these sources, ready to receive. Over and over, dust arrived in sheets so delicate They seemed almost like weather becoming ground. You can picture the surface during such a phase. Low plants bend close to the earth. The soil is thin. A pale film gathers in sheltered places. Wind moves around tufts of grass and leaves tiny tails of dust behind them. The air tastes mineral and dry. The horizon is soft at its edges. Nothing is still, yet nothing feels urgent. When the dust settles, it does not lie perfectly flat. It follows the shape of what it lands on. It collects in hollows more readily than on exposed ridges. It thickens behind vegetation. It builds gently around stems. Over time, these small differences can influence drainage, root growth, and the next round of deposition. The surface is always responding. That responsiveness is part of why the Loess Plateau feels alive, even when we are talking about sediment. It is not a lifeless stack of powder. It is a conversation between wind, water, plants, and slope. Each influence is quiet by itself. Together, they make a landscape that can hold villages, fields, paths, ravines, and long histories of climate within one soft body of earth. We stay with the natural story and let human noise fall away. The plateau existed before any footpath crossed it. The dust moved before anyone named it. Rain carved gullies before anyone stood at their edges. At night, even now, the old processes continue in small ways, with grain shifting, slopes settling, and roots holding the surface in darkness. As we sink further, a darker band appears again in the Loess Plateau, and the mood changes from dry wind to softened soil. The imagined temperature warms slightly, rain comes more often, plants spread. The scent deepens toward damp earth and roots. The surface is no longer only receiving dust. It is becoming a living layer. In a soil-forming interval, roots weave through the upper Loess. They take up water and leave fine channels when they decay. Small organisms mix organic matter into the mineral grains. Weathering changes minerals grain by grain. The color darkens. The structure becomes more crumbly. The layer records not only dust, but the presence of time spent near the surface. You can imagine kneeling there in a mild season. The ground gives a little beneath your hand. It is not powder anymore. It has body. A few roots thread through it. The smell after rain is rounded and calm. Water moves down slowly, carrying dissolved minerals. Above, grass holds droplets that catch the dim light. These ancient soils tell us that the Loess Plateau has known many moods. It has been dry and open. It has been greener and more stable. It has received dust in abundance, then rested long enough for that dust to weather and darken. We move through those moods like someone walking through rooms with the lamps turned low. The science of paleosols can become technical, but we can keep it soft. A buried soil forms when deposition slows enough for surface processes to work. Roots, water, organisms, and chemistry transform the upper Loess. Later, renewed dust deposition covers that soil, preserving it below a new layer. The old surface becomes hidden, but not erased. There is comfort in that. What has been covered can still remain. What is quiet can still hold meaning. The Loess Plateau is full of buried surfaces, each one once touched by light and weather. Now they rest inside the land, layered in muted browns and yellows, waiting without hurry. And below this softened interval, the water of time changes again, and we pass into another pale layer of wind-laid dust. The transition is gradual. The darker soil fades upward and downward into lighter Loess. Boundaries are sometimes clear, sometimes gentle. Like sleep, they do not always arrive at once. One state leans into another. The Loess Plateau, in its deepest patience, teaches that landscapes often form by cycles. Wind brings dust. Again, rain cuts channels. Slopes adjust. Plants return and hold what they can. The same actions repeat, but never in exactly the same way, because climate, vegetation, and terrain keep shifting around one another. If you listen inwardly, the rhythm is almost tidal. Though we are far from the sea, deposition, weathering, erosion, rest. Deposition, weathering, erosion, rest. Not as a sharp chant, but as a low movement beneath the land. The plateau rises from repetitions so slow that they become a kind of stillness. The texture around us remains fine. Loess particles are often silt-sized, small enough to feel smooth, but large enough to give the deposit a particular structure. Clay would be stickier when wet. Sand would feel grittier and settle closer to its source. Silt occupies a middle place, and that middle place gives Loess its drifting, powder-soft character. You can feel that character in the imagined air. A dry breeze lifts a faint haze from a bare patch. It does not sting. It only brushes the skin and leaves a mineral taste at the edge of the mouth. The smell is sun-warmed and pale. The sound is a whisper along grass stems, then silence again. When Loess becomes wet, the feeling changes. The surface darkens, and the grains cling together. Small rivulets may form, where rain exceeds what the ground can absorb. Because the material is fine and easily moved, runoff can carry it away. Over time, this helps create the deep incision and branching valleys that mark the plateau. Even softness can shape itself through yielding. We do not need to make erosion harsh. Think of it as the land finding lower places. Water follows tiny differences in slope. It gathers, leaves a thread, deepens the thread, then returns another season. The walls remain quiet as they are cut. The silt clouds the water softly. The channel grows by remembering where the last water passed. As we continue down, the Loess Plateau surrounds us with evidence of vertical time and horizontal movement together. The layers show upward accumulation, one blanket over another. The gullies show downward cutting, one channel opening through many blankets at once. Wind builds broadly, water reeds narrowly. Between them, the landscape becomes intricate. This is why the plateau can feel both smooth and deeply carved. From far away, the hills may look rounded and soft, with muted colors and gentle ridgelines. From close within, they are full of sudden-looking walls, narrow valleys, and exposed bands. Yet even the steepness has a quiet face. Because the material is fine, matte, and warm in color, you can imagine evening settling again in one of those ravines. The upper rim catches the last gold light. The lower wall is already cool. A dry scent rises from the shaded floor. Somewhere above, wind moves across grass, but down here the sound arrives softened. The Loess Plateau holds you in an earthen hush. Below this carved silence, we move toward older deposits, and the idea of distance becomes wider. The dust sources were not fixed forever. Climate belts shifted. Deserts expanded and contracted. Rivers changed their courses. Glaciers grew and retreated in lands beyond the plateau. Each change altered what material was available for the wind to carry. The Loess Plateau received the results of these distant adjustments. It was like a quiet listener at the edge of many systems. When drylands released dust, the plateau kept some of it. When vegetation spread, deposition patterns changed. When monsoon rains strengthened, soil formation and erosion responded. The land did not need to move far to record changes from far away. You can feel how connected this makes the earth. A grain lifted from a dry basin may settle on a slope where grass later grows. Rain from a seasonal circulation may seep through that same grain's resting place. A root may pass beside it. Then another layer may cover it for thousands of years. Nothing is separate for long. The monsoon is part of this quiet story. In warmer, wetter intervals, summer rains could reach the plateau more strongly. Those rains helped form soils, deepen weathering and support vegetation. In colder or drier times, dust deposition often became more dominant. The balance between wind and rain gave the Loess Plateau much of its layered character. Imagine the arrival of summer rain after a dry spell. The first drops darken the pale surface. Dust settles out of the air. The smell of wet loess rises quickly, earthy and mineral, with a warmth that seems to come from the ground itself. Water threads into pores. Tiny channels shine briefly before sinking away. Then imagine a long dry season afterward. The surface lightens again. Fine cracks may appear. A breeze moves loose particles across the top. Grass seeds wait. The land does not resist these changes. It receives them, adjusts, and holds their trace over ages. Receiving becomes form, and form becomes the plateau we are drifting through. As we descend further, the Loess Plateau becomes less like a view and more like a breathing thickness of earth. Around you, the world is reduced to grain, pore, root trace, and muted color. This is a good place to slow the mind. There is almost nothing here that asks for quick attention. Even change arrives softly. The pore spaces in Loess are small, but important. They hold air and allow water to move. They help roots enter. They also affect how the material responds to wetting, drying, and pressure. In some Loess, a delicate open structure can collapse when saturated or disturbed, because the grains lose the support that held them apart. We can speak of that without alarm. It is another way softness reorganizes itself. Dry Loess may stand steeply because its grains, pores, and mineral bonds hold together. Add enough water, and some of that arrangement changes. The material settles into a denser form. The land exhales a little of the air it once held. If you imagine this at a tiny scale, it is almost tender. Grains lean against one another. Minerals form weak bridges. Air rests in small spaces. Water arrives and softens the contacts. The grains move closer. A minute structure becomes another minute structure. The larger landscape is made from these hidden rearrangements, all too quiet to hear. The Loess Plateau, then, is not frozen. It is still responding to moisture, roots, gravity, and wind. Slopes creep, dust moves, rills deepen or fill, vegetation catches new particles. The processes that built the plateau have not vanished. They continue in softer, modern forms, woven into the present surface. Above us, somewhere, a breeze may be carrying a little dust tonight. It may pass over a ridge, brush through dry stems, and settle in a hollow where last season's roots still hold the ground. The layer it makes may be almost nothing, but almost nothing is exactly how Loess begins. The plateau is still learning itself, grain by grain, and as we pass into another buried horizon, the colors shift once more, and the Loess Plateau turns from pale straw to muted brown. This old soil was once the top of the world. It felt sunlight. It received rain. It held roots. Now it rests inside the hill, and we drift beside it like quiet guests in a room where time has been sleeping. The roots that once entered this layer are gone, but their traces may remain. Fine channels, subtle stains, and changes in structure show where life moved through the dust. Soil is not just mineral matter, it is mineral matter touched by air, water, and organisms. Even after burial, that touch can remain visible to those who learn to look gently. You can imagine the ancient surface in a warmer interval. Grasses stir in a mild wind. The air smells of damp soil after rain. The ground is firm enough to hold roots, soft enough to accept new dust. Insects move through the stems. Water seeps downward. The whole surface is alive in a low, unhurried way. Then, slowly, conditions change. The climate dries or cools. Vegetation thins. More dust begins to arrive. At first, it gathers lightly around the plants. Then it blankets the soil more steadily. The old surface becomes buried beneath new Loess. Its daylight fades. Its root zone becomes an underground band, held in the quiet interior of the plateau. There is no sadness in this. Burial is preservation here. The old soil is covered, and because it is covered, it remains part of the record. The Loess Plateau holds these former surfaces like pressed leaves inside a book. We do not need to open them quickly. We only pass by, noticing their warmth in the layered wall. The chemistry within such layers can reveal changes in rainfall, temperature, and vegetation. Carbonates may be leached downward in wetter periods. Iron may redden or brown as minerals weather. Clay content can increase as particles alter and move. These are scientific details, but they are also gentle traces of weather touching dust for a very long time. If you let each process become sensory, it feels less abstract. Rain is cool on the surface. Roots are fine threads moving through dark soil. Minerals change color slowly, like fabric taking dye from repeated washing. Carbonate gathers in pale flecks and nodules. small and quiet in the earth. The science returns to touch. Below this, the water of memory thins again, and we drift into a broader pale body of Loess where old winds seem to continue without sound. The Loess Plateau is wide above us, but here the width is held in a single wall of silt. Every particle once had space around it in the air. Now each one rests among others, making stillness from movement. The journey from airborne dust to solid landscape is a kind of slowing. First the grain is lifted, then it travels, then it falls, then it is held by other grains, roots, moisture, and time. Eventually, what was once moving becomes ground. You can feel that slowing in your own body, as if each thought is settling into place. The wind that carried Loess often moved near the ground, especially for larger silt and fine sand. Some particles bounced or rolled in short movements before settling. Finer particles could rise higher and travel farther. The air sorted them by size and weight, but never perfectly. Natural sorting is patient, not mechanical. It leaves gradients, mixtures, and subtle changes. On the plateau, those changes can affect texture from place to place. Nearer sources may have coarser material. Farther reaches may hold finer dust. Slopes may gather deposits differently from broad surfaces. Vegetation may create small traps. The Loess Plateau is one name for a vast and varied body of earth, not a single uniform blanket. You can picture moving across it at dusk. One ridge feels dry and open with wind on your face. A sheltered hollow smells faintly of grass and damp soil. A gully wall holds the day's heat under your palm. A terrace catches soft light. Everywhere, the same basic material appears in changing moods: pale, brown, gold, gray, and shadowed. This variety keeps the landscape from being empty. The quiet is full of small differences: a crumbly soil surface, a powdery ledge, a root-bound slope, a freshly cut wall after rain, a fine dusting on leaves. When you listen closely, the plateau is not silent because nothing is happening. It is silent because everything is happening slowly. As we descend further, the Loess Plateau begins to feel ancient enough that ordinary time loosens. A human day is a thin brightness at the top. A season is a faint change in moisture. A century is a little deepening of soil, a little widening of a channel. The main rhythm belongs to climate cycles and the long work of dust. During cold glacial periods, strong winds and sparse vegetation often favored dust production and transport. During warmer interglacial periods, soils tended to develop more strongly. This pattern is simplified, but it gives us a soft framework. Pale Loess, darker soil, pale Loess, darker soil. A quiet alternation of exposure and burial. You do not need to memorize the terms. Let them become colors instead. Pale means the wind was generous with dust. Darker means the surface rested and changed. Pale means dry air and open ground. Darker means roots, rain, and weathering. The Loess Plateau speaks in these subdued shades, and we answer by becoming still enough to notice. There is also a feeling of vertical tenderness in this landscape. The layers are not hard, like basalt or granite. They are more yielding, more porous, more easily shaped by water and roots. Yet their very softness allowed them to build thickness. Because the dust kept coming, the deposits became deep. Softness, repeated, became mass. This is a restful thought. A thing does not need to be hard to endure. It can endure by being renewed, by receiving, by settling again after being moved. The Loess Plateau is not fragile in the simple sense. It is responsive. It changes where water cuts it, where vegetation holds it, where wind touches it. Its endurance is a slow adjustment. Below this thought, another bridge opens, and we move into the relationship between the plateau and the Yellow River, whose name itself seems to carry the color of Loess. The river and its tributaries have cut through Loess, carried silt, and helped reveal the nature of the land. We approach this gently, as a meeting of water and dust. The Yellow River gathers fine sediment from Loess landscapes, and that sediment gives its waters a warm, cloudy tone. Imagine standing near a tributary after rain, seeing water thickened with pale earth. The sound is low and continuous, The banks smell damp and mineral. Silt moves in suspension. Each grain briefly returned to travel after ages of rest. This does not undo the plateau. It continues the cycle. Dust became loess. Loess became soil and slope. Rain loosened grains. Water carried them onward. Some may settle again in floodplains, deltas, or riverbeds, waiting for another possible movement. The earth is full of such handoffs, and the Loess Plateau is one of the great places where they can be seen. You can imagine a grain's long sleep inside the hillside, followed by release during a rain. It slips from the wall, enters a small rill, moves into a stream, then drifts in cloudy water. The motion is still gentle in our telling. It is not escape, it is continuation. The grain has belonged to air, land, and water. The plateau's gullies and river systems are connected in branching patterns. Small channels feed larger ones. Larger valleys guide sediment away. This drainage network gives the landscape its carved appearance. Yet between the cuts, broad remnants of loess remain, holding fields of time above the channels. The land is both preserved and opened, both built and carried. At night, along an earthen bank, the water might sound thicker than clear water, softly brushing against silt. The smell would be damp, with a faint clay-like note. The air above the channel would be cooler. If the moon were present, it would not flash sharply, but blur on the suspended sediment. Everything would seem filtered. As we leave the river's edge and sink back into the hill, the Loess Plateau becomes quiet again, and the motion of water fades into the deeper hush of stored dust. We are not finished moving downward. The older layers wait beneath us, pale and brown, each one formed under a sky we can only imagine. The temperature seems cooler here. The light seems farther away. Deep in the deposit, pressure has increased only gently compared with the deep sea. Yet the weight of overlying earth still matters. Grains are held more firmly. Pores may be compressed or altered. Minerals may cement contacts in small ways. The loess remains recognizable, but burial gives it a steadier presence. Time presses softly, not as a blow, but as a long hand resting on the land. You can feel that weight as calm. Above, grasses move. Above, rain comes and goes. Above, a little dust may lift in the afternoon. Down here, change is slower and more inward. Moisture may pass through, chemistry may continue, roots may not reach, and the old layer rests in a darkness made not of fear, but of being covered. The Loess Plateau has many such covered places. Some are exposed only where gullies cut down. Others remain hidden beneath slopes and surfaces. The hiddenness is part of the piece. Not every record has to be visible at once. Some things can be held in reserve, wrapped in earth, waiting for water, weather, or careful attention to reveal them. When scientists study loess, they may read magnetic minerals, grain sizes, carbonates, fossils of tiny organisms, or chemical signatures. Each method offers a way to understand past climates. But in this sleepy descent, we can keep the larger feeling. The plateau preserves old winds and old rains together. It is climate made touchable. Imagine taking a small piece of loess between your fingers. It crumbles easily when dry. It feels smooth, almost floury, but with a faint grit that tells you it is mineral. If you breathe near it, the dust may lift. If you add water, it darkens and holds together. In that simple change, you can feel the whole landscape's sensitivity. And as we pass below another ancient soil, the Loess Plateau deepens into a slower register, where the earliest layers in our imagined descent feel almost dreamlike. We are far from the current surface now. The present wind is a memory above memory. Around us are sediments that have already slept through many changes of climate, vegetation, and river cutting. The oldest loess in a sequence may be altered by long burial and soil processes. Its original texture can still remain, but it has been touched by water, minerals, and pressure over great spans. The colors may be muted, boundaries may be complex, some layers may be partly eroded before newer dust arrived. The record is rich because nature is never perfectly tidy. That imperfection is soothing. The The Loess Plateau is not a clean stack of pages printed by a machine. It is a landscape made by weather, and weather always leaves soft variations. A surface may form longer in one place than another. A slope may lose part of a layer. A hollow may preserve extra dust. The story is continuous, but textured. You can let that texture mirror thought as sleep approaches. Not every memory is sharp. Not every boundary is clear. Some things fade into others. Some remain as color more than shape. The plateau accepts this. It does not need every line to be exact in order to hold the truth of long formation. Around us, the imagined darkness is warm brown rather than black. It has the color of earth without sunlight. You can sense the fine grains packed around tiny spaces. There is no wind here now, only the memory of wind. There is no rain falling here now, only the old pathways rain once made. The quiet has depth. Below this, we move gently toward the making of landforms at the surface again, because even deep layers influence the shape above. Where loess is thick, valleys can cut deeply into it. Where buried soils create differences in strength or permeability, slopes may weather in varied ways. The old interior quietly affects the visible world. A gully wall may stand nearly vertical for a time because loess can hold such faces when dry. Then rain, seepage, frost, roots, and gravity slowly modify it. Small pieces fall. The wall retreats. A ledge forms where a firmer layer resists a little more. A darker paleosol band may show as a stripe across the face. The hidden layers become surface expression. You can imagine watching such a wall in soft morning light. There is no movement you can see at first. Dust clings to small protrusions. A dry grass root hangs from the rim. The air smells faintly of earth and cool shade. Then perhaps a tiny crumb loosens and falls without drama, leaving a mark so small the wall seems unchanged. Over years, those small loosenings matter. Over centuries, the gully widens. Over longer time, whole slopes retreat and reshape drainage divides. The Loess Plateau is sculpted by countless minor adjustments, each one modest enough to miss, all of them together enough to make valleys, ridges, and broad rolling uplands. We can rest with the scale of that again. The land is not still because it does nothing. It is still because its doing is spread across time. A sleeping listener can understand this better than a hurried mind. The slowest processes often feel most like peace, because they ask us to release the need to watch them finish. And as the imagined descent carries us onward, the Loess Plateau opens another layer of life at the surface, where plants become quiet partners in formation. Their leaves catch dust, their stems slow air, their roots bind grains. Their decay feeds soil. They are small compared with the plateau, but the plateau's surface depends on such smallness. A grass blade can hold a line of dust after wind. In morning moisture, the grains may stick more firmly. Around the base, more particles collect. Roots below make a fine net through the loess. When rain comes, that net reduces how easily grains are carried away. The plant is not building a plateau alone, but it is helping the surface stay long enough to receive more. Shrubs and steppe vegetation can do similar work. They create sheltered pockets where wind speed drops. Dust falls there. Soil moisture may linger a little longer. Seeds may find a place. The ground becomes uneven in a subtle living way. Over time, these patterns influence how loess accumulates and how it resists erosion. You can feel the tenderness of that cooperation. Wind brings, plants hold, rain changes, roots stitch. The Loess Plateau is not only a geological wonder, but also a quiet ecosystem of surfaces, where living things interact with ancient dust. The life does not need to be lush to matter. Sparse life can still shape the land. Imagine the smell of dry grass on a ridge in late light. The stems make a soft rasping sound. Dust rests along their lower leaves. The ground is pale beneath them, with small root shadows where the soil has broken. A breeze passes through, and for a moment a few grains lift, shimmer, and settle again. The surface breathes. Below the roots, microbes and small soil creatures work in darkness. They break down organic matter. They move minerals in tiny ways. They help create soil structure. Their world is moist after rain, dry between seasons, and always intimate with the grains around them. We rarely see this life, but the plateau's upper layers are touched by it. The idea of unseen life fits the mood of the Loess Plateau. So much happens below notice. Dust falls too softly to hear. Roots grow too slowly to watch. Minerals weather without sound. A soil forms in a patience deeper than ordinary attention. You and I can let ourselves become part of that unseen pace for a while. As we sink beyond the active root zone again, the living surface fades above, and the older Loess closes around us in a dry, steady hush. The bridge between life and sediment is not sharp. Root traces remain. Organic stains fade. Pores continue. The surface's former life becomes a subtle pattern inside the deposit. Nothing is wasted. Nothing needs to speak loudly. The Loess Plateau's formation also depends on regional position. It lies where wind-borne material from arid and semi-arid source regions could accumulate across broad uplands. Its location allowed dust supply, atmospheric circulation, and land surface conditions to meet. This meeting lasted long enough to build one of the most extensive Loess landscapes on Earth. Even that scale can be held softly. Do not picture a map too sharply. Picture instead a wide inland expanse under a pale sky. To the northwest, dry source areas release fine sediment. Across open distances, wind moves with seasonal persistence. Here, the land rises and receives. The Loess Plateau becomes a quiet basin of airfall, though it is not a basin in the watery sense. The phrase airfall is gentle. It means particles settling out of the air. Snow falls. Ash can fall. Dust falls. Loess is made from such falling, repeated beyond imagination. If you listen to the word inside your breath, it has no hard edge. Airfall, a falling from the moving sky into the keeping of the ground. You can imagine the plateau after a day of dusty wind. Every surface carries a thin film. Leaves look muted. Stones are powdered. A path is softened. The horizon clears as evening comes, and what was airborne has joined the earth again. No single surface seems changed, yet the land has received a little more of itself. And as we move further through this slow receiving, the Loess Plateau asks us to notice the difference between softness and emptiness. A soft landscape can be full of structure. Loess has pores, aggregates, layers, nodules, root traces, and subtle boundaries. Its hills have ridges, hollows, ravines, and terraces. Its quiet is not blank, it is finely made. When the sun moves low across Loess hills, the small forms become visible. Gentle ridges cast long shadows. Gully walls show bands. The surface texture catches light in matte gold. There is no glare. The dust seems to drink brightness and return it as warmth. You can feel the light resting on your eyelids, even if your eyes are closed. The air cools with evening. Dry scents sharpen slightly. A little breeze moves down slope. Sound carries from far away as a softened thread, then disappears. The land itself seems to muffle the world. This is why the Loess Plateau belongs naturally to sleep narration, because its beauty is not loud. It invites a long gaze, and then a slower breath. In geological terms, Loess landscapes are also sensitive to climate change, because deposition, soil formation, and erosion depend on moisture, vegetation, and wind. But we do not need to turn that into urgency here. We can simply recognize responsiveness. The plateau records shifts because it feels them. It changes because it is open to air and rain. There is humility in such openness. Hard rock resists for a long time, then breaks. Loess receives, alters, and yields more readily. It does not pretend to be separate from weather. It becomes a landscape by participating with weather. You can let that thought settle gently, as though the body itself can stop resisting the room and simply rest within it. Below this evening surface, the layered deposits continue. We pass another pale band, then another muted soil, each one speaking the same language with a slightly different tone. The Loess Plateau is repetitive. but not monotonous. Like waves in darkness, like breath at the edge of sleep, each return is familiar enough to soothe and varied enough to keep the mind softly engaged. Some layers may contain tiny fossil remains, such as shells of land snails, preserved in the loess or old soils. These small creatures once lived at the surface, responding to moisture, vegetation, and temperature. Their shells can remain after burial, delicate signals of past environments. We can imagine them not as specimens, but as quiet lives once moving through grass and damp soil. A snail shell in loess is a small spiral of weather. It tells of moisture enough for life, of calcium in the ground, of a surface that was not only dust but habitat. Held in the hand, it would feel light and fragile. Buried in the plateau, it becomes part of a much larger memory. The smallest forms keep company with the largest times. Pollen, too, may rest in sediments or soils under certain conditions, offering hints of past vegetation. Charcoal may tell of old fires in some records, though we keep our focus gentle. Mineral grains, fossils, chemistry, and color all contribute to a layered understanding. The Loess Plateau is read through many small traces, none of them needing to be loud. You can think of the plateau as a dim archive where every shelf is made of earth. The pages are not paper. They are silt, soil, carbonate, root mark, and buried shell. The writing is not made of ink. It is made of texture and tone. We move through it slowly, without turning anything too fast. As we sink further, the boundaries between science and sensation soften again. Grain size becomes the feel of powder on fingertips. Carbonate becomes a pale fleck in a warm wall. Monsoon rain becomes the smell of wet dust. Wind direction becomes the way grass leans. Time becomes thickness. The Loess Plateau lets knowledge become bodily and calm. There is a deep comfort in learning this way. You do not need to hold every fact. You can let the facts pass like particles in air, and keep only the feeling of how the land formed. Fine sediment made by distant erosion, wind carrying it across open spaces, deposition on uplands, soil forming during quieter intervals, water carving what wind had laid down. That sequence is simple enough to sleep beside. It does not end. It circles gently. Dust, surface, soil, cut, dust again. Each part belongs to the others. Each part makes the plateau more itself. The land is not a single object, but a long relationship among processes, and we are drifting through that relationship at a pace soft enough for night. Below this, the imagined descent enters a layer where the old wind seems especially present. The loess is pale, thick and fine. There are fewer signs of long soil formation. It feels like a time when dust arrived more steadily than roots could transform it.
The air of that ancient surface, if we could breathe it, might have been cool, dry, and faintly opaque. You stand there in thought, with me beside you, as particles move through low light. The sky is wide, the ground is open. Sparse plants tremble but do not cover everything. Dust gathers in the lee of each stem. It rests on your sleeve. It softens the shape of stones. The world seems hushed by its own suspended earth. That is one of the mysteries of Loess. It is airborne land. Before it is ground beneath your feet, it is ground moving through the sky. The boundary between air and earth becomes less certain. A hillside can begin as a haze. A future terrace can arrive as a pale breath. The Loess Plateau is a settled atmosphere. When the particles land, they often do so with little disturbance. There is no splash, no crash, no clear line between before and after. A dusting becomes a film becomes a layer becomes part of a deposit. Over time, the deposit becomes thick enough for erosion to carve, for people to recognize, for science to study, and for sleep to imagine as a soft descent. You can let your own thoughts settle in the same way. One thought comes down, another rests beside it. The mind does not have to empty suddenly. It only has to stop lifting every grain back into the wind. Slowly, the surface becomes still. Slowly, the inner weather quiets. The plateau's formation becomes a pattern for rest. And as we move below this pale interval, the Loess Plateau returns us to a warmer buried soil. where the old surface held rain longer and life had more time to work. The transition is quiet, like entering a room with thicker air. The color deepens. The imagined scent becomes damp, rooty, and mineral. The dust has become more grounded here.
Soil formation can include the movement of clay particles downward through the profile. Fine materials can wash from upper horizons and gather lower down. Minerals weather. Organic matter accumulates near the surface. Carbonates may dissolve and reprecipitate. These processes sound numerous, but each happens slowly, in water films, root spaces, and tiny pores. If you imagine the soil close to your face, it is a world of small chambers. Water curves between grains. A root hair explores a pore. A mineral edge softens over time. A fleck of organic matter darkens the surrounding earth. The whole process is intimate, almost silent, and held in darkness just beneath a living surface. On the Loess Plateau, such old soils can mark intervals when dust accumulation slowed or climate favored stronger weathering. They are pauses, but not empty pauses. They are active rests. The surface remains exposed long enough to change. Then later dust returns and covers the work, preserving the pores as a darker band. This is a beautiful idea for night. Rest is not nothing. Rest can be where transformation happens most quietly. The soil forms while the dust is not arriving as fast. The body restores itself while the day is not demanding as much. The land and the listener share this simple permission to change without visible effort. Below the soil, another pale Loess layer waits, and we continue downward through the slow alternation. The Loess Plateau is now less a landscape we stand on, and more a landscape we float through. As if the earth has become a still yellow sea. Around us the grains are suspended in time rather than air. Everything is settled, and yet everything remembers motion. The mineral composition of Loess can vary, but quartz is commonly abundant because it resists weathering. Feldspar may be present along with mica, carbonates, and other minerals. These particles were broken from parent rocks by physical and chemical processes before wind ever touched them. Loess formation begins before Loess deposition. It begins with rock becoming small enough to travel. You can imagine mountains weathering in cold and dry conditions. Water freezes and thaws in cracks. Glaciers grind bedrock into flour. Rivers carry and sort sediment. Drying exposes fine material to wind. Each step prepares the dust. The Loess Plateau is the receiver, but its story begins in many places where stone was slowly reduced to breath. That reduction is not destruction in a final sense. It is transformation of scale. A rock face becomes fragments. Fragments become grains. Grains become airborne dust. Dust becomes Loess. Loess becomes soil. Soil supports roots. Roots help hold more dust. The sequence turns hardness into softness and softness into land. As you listen, perhaps your own sense of the day can follow that transformation. Hard edges become smaller. Sharp thoughts become grains. The wind of attention carries them for a while, then lets them settle. Nothing has to be forced away. It can simply become part of a quieter layer, held without needing to be solved tonight. And as our descent continues, the Loess Plateau reveals the role of slope, because every surface receives dust differently depending on its angle, exposure, and shelter. A flat upland may collect Loess broadly. A leeward slope may catch extra particles. A steep face may lose material more easily. The land's shape guides both accumulation and removal. Imagine a ridge under steady wind. On the windward side, air presses and moves quickly. Over the crest it shifts and slows in places. Behind small irregularities, dust falls. In shallow hollows, it gathers. Along a slope, rain may later move it downward. The pattern is never perfectly even. It is a soft map made by moving air and water. This unevenness helps explain the plateau's texture. Some areas hold thick mantles. Others reveal older material. Gullies cut where runoff concentrates. Ridges remain where drainage has not yet removed them. Terraces and slopes form under the combined influence of deposition, erosion, and stability. The Loess Plateau is a balance, always temporary, always beautiful. The soundscape in such a place would be restrained. Wind over a ridge, dust against dry leaves, a faint crumble from an exposed wall, rain ticking lightly before it becomes runoff. Then, after weather passes, a wide stillness. The land seems to absorb sound the way it absorbs light, returning only a softer version. Below the slope's influence, deeper layers are sheltered from daily weather, but they still belong to the same form. They support the surface. They give thickness to the ridges. They become visible in valley walls. They affect how water moves through the land. Even what is buried participates. The Loess Plateau is connected from top to depth. As we move on, the next layer begins where the last one fades, and the Loess Plateau becomes a study in color. Pale yellow loess, brown buried soil, whitish carbonate flecks, gray shadows in pores, warm gold in sunlit walls. Color here is not decoration. It is evidence of minerals, moisture, organic matter, and oxidation, all held quietly in the sediment. You can picture a freshly exposed wall after a small collapse. The inside is brighter than the weathered surface, a soft raw yellow. Over time, air and moisture will mute it. Fine cracks may appear. Rain will draw narrow streaks downward. Roots may enter from above. The exposed face begins its own conversation with the present atmosphere. Touching that wall in imagination, your fingers come away dusty. The grains are fine enough to cling to skin. The smell is dry and faintly alkaline, like old earth warmed by sun. If the wall is shaded, it feels cool despite its warm color. The contrast is soothing, warmth to the eye, coolness to the hand. The science of color can be traced to iron compounds, organic matter, carbonate content, and weathering intensity. Stronger soil formation often deepens or reddens hues, depending on conditions. Less weathered loess remains lighter. Carbonate accumulations appear pale. These changes help reveal climate and soil history. Yet to the sleepy mind, they are also simply the land's quiet tones. Color slows perception. You do not hurry through a wall of muted bands. Your gaze moves from one layer to the next, then returns. The Loess Plateau encourages that kind of looking. It rewards patience because its details are not hidden by complexity alone, but by subtlety. You have to soften your attention to see them. And as we sink beneath this banded wall, the plateau's story grows more spacious again, spreading outward into the ancient winds that crossed northern China and nearby drylands. The direction and strength of those winds changed through seasons and climatic periods. Some brought dust from broad source regions. Some carried finer particles farther east. The plateau received according to the breath of the atmosphere. Wind is invisible until it touches something. It bends grass. It lifts dust. It cools skin. It hums faintly around a ridge. On the Loess Plateau, wind also becomes visible after it stops, because the dust it carried remains. The settled layer is a footprint of air. The hill is a trace of movement made still. This is why Loess feels almost dreamlike. It is not lava hardened after fire, or coral built by animals in bright water, or sandstone laid by rivers and dunes alone. It is a landscape built from the sky's fine cargo. The ground beneath you was once suspended above ground. The plateau is earth remembering that it flew. You can let that image drift for a while. Pale dust in the air, low sun through haze, a ridge waiting quietly, grasses combing the wind, particles falling in silence, night arriving over a surface that has become almost imperceptibly thicker. The Loess Plateau grows by such nearly invisible evenings, one after another, until invisibility becomes grandeur. Below this airy memory, we return to the intimate scale of grain contacts. Loess grains often have angular shapes because they have not been rounded completely by long water transport. Those tiny edges help particles interlock. Carbonate and clay can add weak bonding. Pores remain between grains. Together, these features help Loess maintain steep faces when conditions are dry. The word interlock might sound mechanical, but the feeling is delicate. Think of countless fine grains leaning and touching in small arrangements. None is strong alone. Together, they form a wall, a slope, a ridge. Their strength is collective and quiet. The Loess Plateau stands in part because small things support one another. Water changes those contacts. It can dissolve some bonds, add weight, and move particles. It can also help form soil aggregates when present in gentler cycles. The same substance that carves gullies can nurture plants and deepen soils. Rain is not one thing in the landscape. It is many things, depending on timing, amount, slope, and season. You can hear rain differently now. On a stable grassed surface, it is soft nourishment. On a bare slope, it is a mover of grains. In a gully, it is a thread finding its path. In a soil profile, it is chemistry in motion. The Loess Plateau receives each version and records the result in form, texture, and layered memory. As we descend beneath the reach of fresh rain, the sound fades again. Only the idea of water remains, stored in mineral changes and old channels. The surrounding Loess is dry in our imagination, cool and fine. It holds darkness gently. If there is pressure here, it feels like being wrapped in thick quiet, surrounded by the patient weight of accumulated dust. The next passage of our descent follows time not as a line, but as a slow settling spiral. We revisit wind, then soil, then water, each time a little deeper, each time with more calm. The Loess Plateau does not mind repetition. Repetition is how it was made. A lullaby can be truthful when the landscape itself repeats. At the surface, wind lifts dust. At the surface, grass catches dust. At the surface, rain changes dust. Beneath the surface, old dust remembers all three. This is the simple pattern we carry downward. You can feel it like a hand on the shoulder, steady, unhurried, asking nothing more than attention softened into rest. The Loess Plateau also shows how climate can be archived on land with remarkable continuity. Marine sediments hold ocean histories. Ice cores hold frozen atmospheres. Loess holds wind and soil histories in a terrestrial form. Here, the land itself became a recorder, not through intention, but through the simple fact that dust kept falling and surfaces kept changing. For a listener near sleep, that idea can remain broad and comforting. The earth keeps records without needing to remember as we do. It stores change in layers, rings, shells, ice, mud, and dust. The Loess Plateau is one of those slow memories. We are resting inside it for a while, feeling how gently a planet can write. And as we pass into the next pale interval, the grain of the air seems to return, though we remain underground in thought. The old dust layer is thick enough that its formation must have taken long persistence. Winds came again and again. Source regions offered sediment again and again. The plateau received again and again. There is a lullaby in that repetition. The surface during deposition may have been cold in winter, dry for long stretches, and open enough for dust to move. Perhaps snow lay thinly at times, trapping particles as it melted. Perhaps spring winds carried fine sediment across the land. Perhaps summer vegetation held some of what arrived. The exact details varied, but the broad movement stayed patient. You can imagine standing under a pale morning sky while dust softens the light. It settles in eyelashes, on sleeves, on the ground at your feet. The air smells dry with a faint mineral edge. There is no sharp sound, only wind, grass, and the quiet accumulation of particles too small to follow. The world is making a future layer. Over many years, the surface rises by tiny amounts. Roots adjust. Small depressions fill. Slope shapes soften. Then a wetter interval may come, and the new Loess begins to weather. Soil forms. The color changes. Time passes into texture. The Loess Plateau grows not by height alone, but by transformation of what height has received. As we settle deeper now, the imagined body can grow heavier in a peaceful way. The bed beneath you may feel like a soft plane. The room may feel cooler at the edges. Your breathing can follow the plateau's slow exchange, receiving and releasing, receiving and releasing. We remain with the Loess Plateau, where dust becomes depth, and depth becomes quiet. Below this layer, the buried soil returns us to warmth. It is darker, steadier, and more intimate. The old surface may have supported grasses or steppe vegetation under a more favorable climate. Rainwater moved through it often enough to alter minerals and carry carbonates. Roots loosened and bound the ground at once. The soil became a gentle seam of life inside the dust. If we could place our ear near that ancient surface while it was alive, perhaps we would hear almost nothing. A root growing has no sound for us. A mineral weathering has no sound. A droplet moving through a pore is nearly silent. Yet these quiet actions are enough to change color, texture, and chemistry over time. The Loess Plateau teaches that audible events are not always the most important ones. Much of the world is made by processes below hearing. The slow growth of a soil, the gradual thickening of a dust mantle, the deepening of a valley through repeated rains, the settling of particles after wind has gone. Sleep belongs to that same family of quiet transformations. You can let your attention become porous, like Loess. Let impressions pass through without holding them tightly. The smell of dust, the coolness of shade, the gold of a wall, the hush of grass, the thought of ancient wind, each one enters, moves gently downward and finds its place among the others. And now, as we drift below the darker band, the Loess Plateau opens once more into pale silt, and the sequence continues without asking us to mark an ending. The old surface is behind us and above us. Another wind-laid interval surrounds us. The earth is fine, dry, and softly colored, and the whole landscape seems to breathe through its hidden pores. The process of Loess formation is slow enough that it can seem almost motionless. That is part of its gift. We are used to noticing the dramatic outline of mountains or the clear flow of rivers. But Loess asks us to notice deposit, cover, and gradual thickening. It asks us to believe in the power of small arrivals. The Loess Plateau is proof that quiet can accumulate. A single dust event may leave only a trace. A season may leave a little more. 1,000 seasons may begin to matter. Many thousands of years can create meters of deposit. Longer still, and the deposits become a regional landscape. The scale is large, but the action remains small. This contrast is the heart of the plateau's calm. You can picture a calm afternoon after wind has passed. The air is clearer now. Dust lies on leaves and stones. The hills seem unchanged, but not untouched. The land has received another fine veil. The sun lowers. Shadows enter gullies. Somewhere, a grain rests where it will remain for longer than any waking thought can easily hold. As we continue, the next layer waits, and we move toward it slowly, with the same unhurried care, while the Loess Plateau keeps its long, pale silence around us, and the ancient dust settles deeper into the dark. The darkness here is not empty, because it is filled with the memory of air. Around us, the Loess rests in fine packed grains, each one once lifted, carried and released. You can imagine the old wind becoming still inside the earth. It is a strange and gentle thought, that motion can be stored so quietly beneath your feet. The Loess Plateau holds this stillness in enormous depth, yet it was made by light particles. That contrast is soothing. What feels weightless in the air can become a hillside when repeated long enough. What seems temporary can become a landform. The dust does not know it is building anything, and still the building happens. We drift beside another pale band, and its color seems faintly luminous in the mind. There is no sunlight here, but the yellow earth carries the memory of it. If you touched the layer, it might feel cool, dry, and very smooth. A little powder would cling to your fingertips. The scent would be mineral, muted, and old. This layer may have formed during a time when dry winds crossed open ground more often. Vegetation was sparse enough for particles to move, and source areas held loose sediment ready for travel. The wind did not need to be constant, it only needed to return. Again and again, it lifted fine grains and carried them toward the receiving slopes of the Loess Plateau. You can picture a broad plain far away, with river sediments drying under a pale sky. The smallest grains loosen at the surface. A breeze tests them first. Then a stronger movement of air raises them into a low veil. The horizon softens. The sun becomes a blurred disk. The dust begins its journey, not with violence, but with persistence. Some grains settle quickly near their source. Others remain suspended longer, passing over dry gullies, grasslands, and uplands. The finest ones may travel great distances before they finally fall. The Loess Plateau gathers a portion of this moving cloud, and the gathering becomes layer after layer. The land is shaped by what the air can no longer carry. As we continue downward, the boundary between this pale loess and the next buried soil approaches slowly. The color shifts before the layer changes fully. A warmer brown enters the yellow. The texture may become more structured. You can feel the old surface taking shape again, as though we are approaching a place where roots once held rain. This buried soil in the Loess Plateau was once exposed to sky. It felt weather on its face. It received seeds, moisture, and the slow work of organisms. Over time, its upper part darkened. Minerals altered. The fresh dust became earth in a fuller sense. Then later, more dust arrived and covered it, folding that old living surface into the hill. There is a gentle sadness in covered surfaces, but also comfort. Nothing in this layer is lost. The soil no longer sees the sky, yet it remains readable. It is held in the dim body of the plateau, where time has become protection. You and I pass it quietly, as we would pass a sleeping room with the door half open. The ancient roots are gone, but their pathways remain like faint memories. Rain once moved along those channels. Air entered them. Tiny organisms lived near them. The soil was a busy place in the smallest possible way. Now the traces are still, and the layer has become part of a longer rhythm of wind, rest, and burial. Below this old surface, the water changes again, and we return to the airy stillness of Loess. The next pale layer surrounds us with the softness of deposited silt. It is easy to imagine the grains falling through late afternoon light, settling over a landscape that has not yet become this deep. Each grain arrives alone, but never truly alone. The Loess Plateau is an accumulation of companionship among small particles. Quartz rests beside feldspar. Mica lies beside carbonate. Tiny clay coatings may touch silt grains. Pores remain between them. Weak bonds form. Together they make a fabric strong enough to stand, soft enough to crumble, and open enough to breathe water and air. If you hold a handful of dry loess in your mind, it pours softly but not like beach sand. It has a flowery smoothness. It may leave a pale stain on the skin. It feels like something between rock and dust, which is exactly what it is. The Loess Plateau is made from rock that has become almost airborne, then returned to the ground. The making of such fine material takes time before the wind ever begins. Glacial grinding can crush bedrock into mineral flour. Freeze and thaw can break stone apart. Rivers can transport and grind particles. Weathering can loosen surfaces. In dry regions, fine sediments can be exposed, waiting for air to lift them. Loess begins with preparation as much as deposition. You can imagine that preparation happening far beyond the plateau. A cold valley holds ice that slowly grinds stone beneath it. A river spreads silt across a floodplain, then leaves it drying in the sun. A desert margin exposes pale sediment to seasonal winds. Each place sends a small offering. The Loess Plateau receives them in silence. And as we drift deeper through the Loess Plateau, the idea of reception becomes more important. The land is not passive in a simple way. Its slopes, plants, roughness, and position influence where dust falls and where it stays. A surface can be receptive because it is uneven, because it is vegetated, because it slows the air at just the right moment. Picture a small grass clump on a dry slope. The wind moves around it, and behind the stems the air weakens. Dust falls there. A tiny mound begins. Rain later settles it. Roots enter it. More dust collects. The mound may remain small, but across a whole landscape, such small traps help the surface thicken and hold. The Loess Plateau grew through these many subtle acts of holding. A hollow held more than a ridge, a sheltered slope held more than an exposed face, a root mat held more than bare ground. Then, when rain came, some of what was held moved downslope, softening the surface again. The landscape formed through both retention and release. This is a restful balance to contemplate. Holding and releasing are both part of formation. If everything were held forever, channels would not open. If everything were released at once, the plateau would not build. Instead, the land keeps a quiet balance, changing its mind slowly with climate, vegetation, and water. Below this we pass into another darker layer, and the Loess Plateau feels warmer for a moment. The old soil has the mood of a long pause between dusty intervals. It may represent a time when the surface was more stable, when plants had more time to grow, and when rain moved through the upper Loess often enough to change it. You can imagine the surface then, under a mild sky. The wind still carries dust at times, but not enough to bury the soil quickly. Grasses cover more of the ground. The air after rain smells of roots and damp minerals. Small channels of water soak inward, rather than running everywhere at once. The earth becomes more structured, more alive. The processes are slow and intimate. Organic matter darkens the surface. Iron-bearing minerals weather and lend color. Carbonates dissolve from upper layers and gather lower down. Clay particles shift with water. Soil aggregates form, break, and form again. Each change is small, but the old surface has time. Time is the quiet ingredient that turns Loess into soil.
When new dust finally arrives more strongly, it does not erase that soil, it covers it. The old surface becomes sealed under younger material. Its darkened color remains as a band. Its chemistry remains as a memory of moisture and warmth. The Loess Plateau grows taller in the sense of accumulation, but it also grows deeper in memory. We move through that memory without disturbing it. The old soil is not a destination, it is a resting tone inside the sequence. Like a deeper note in a long piece of music, it changes the feeling of everything around it. Pale Loess above, dark soil here, pale Loess below. The pattern continues, slow enough for breathing. As we leave the buried soil, the next bridge carries us into the role of seasonal change on the Loess Plateau. Even within 1 year, the surface can shift from dry wind to rain, from dust movement to plant growth, from open pores to dampened soil. These seasonal pulses are small compared with ice ages, but they are the daily language of the land. In a dry season, the surface lightens and loosens. Fine particles near the top may be lifted by wind. Grasses become brittle and quiet. The smell of earth is dusty and warm. Your skin would feel the air as dry, with a thin touch of grit. The plateau seems to exhale into the sky. Then rain returns, and the surface changes color almost immediately. Pale dust darkens. The smell rises, earthy and full. Water beads, sinks, gathers or runs depending on the slope. The sound of drops on dry ground is soft at first, then fuller. Rills may carry silt, while rooted areas hold together more firmly. The plateau inhales moisture. This seasonal breathing matters over long time. Repeated wetting and drying change soil structure. Vegetation grows and dies back. Runoff patterns adjust. Dust is trapped, moved, or sealed. The Loess Plateau is built by large climatic shifts, but those shifts work through ordinary sensations. Wind on grass, rain on dust, warmth in soil, cold in the open air. You can let those sensations pass slowly through the body. Dryness, then dampness, warm light, then cool shade, wind lifting, rain settling. The sequence is not sharp. It moves like a sleeper turning under a blanket. Even when the landscape changes, it does so in a rhythm that feels ancient and unhurried. Beneath the seasonal surface, old layers keep the record of many such cycles. A pale Loess band may contain countless dry days and dusty winds. A buried soil may contain innumerable rains, roots, and summers. We cannot separate them all. We do not need to. The layers gather them into one quiet tone.
And as we sink further, the Loess Plateau opens into the idea of scale again, from a single grain to an entire region. A grain is nearly weightless, a handful is powder, a slope is earth. A plateau is a vast accumulation of powder made durable by time. The mind can move between these scales like drifting between near and far. At the grain scale, edges and mineral surfaces matter. At the soil scale, pores, roots and water matter. At the slope scale, runoff and gravity matter. At the regional scale, wind patterns, climate, and source sediments matter. The Loess Plateau exists because all these scales overlap. It is not one process, but many processes resting inside one another. You can imagine looking at a gully wall, then looking closer. First you see the landform, a warm vertical face with horizontal bands. Then you see the bands themselves. Then flecks, pores, root traces, small nodules. Then individual grains too fine to follow. The deeper you look, the quieter the landscape becomes, yet the more activity it contains. This is a good way to drift towards sleep. Attention narrows, then widens, then narrows again. The body knows the bed, the mind knows the plateau. Dust falls, soil forms, water cuts, wind returns. Each idea settles into the next. There is no need to hold the whole landscape at once. Below this, the next pale interval seems especially thick, and we enter it as if entering a long corridor of settled air. The Loess Plateau's dust-rich layers can accumulate over immense spans, especially when conditions favor frequent deposition. The result is a body of silt, so deep that it can be cut into cliffs and valleys, yet it began as repeated thin veils. A thin veil is almost nothing. It lies over the ground and dulls the color of leaves. It softens footprints. It gathers along the edges of stones. It can be brushed away by a hand. But when the veil returns for thousands upon thousands of seasons, and when much of it remains, the softness thickens into something that can reshape a region. The Loess Plateau is a landscape of returned veils. Each one falls quietly. Each one seems temporary. Together they make depth. This is why the plateau feels so suited to night. It reminds you that rest also comes in layers. One breath settles, then another, a thought loosens. The room darkens. Sleep does not need to arrive all at once. The old wind in this layer may have carried not only mineral dust, but also faint traces of the environments it crossed. Grain size can suggest wind strength and source distance. Mineral content can hint at origins. Magnetic properties can reflect weathering in soils and climatic conditions. These signals are quiet and indirect, but they allow the Loess Plateau to speak across time. You do not need to follow the measurements. Just imagine the land holding subtle clues. A slightly coarser band, a darker soil, a stronger magnetic signal from weathered minerals, a carbonate nodule forming where water paused. Each clue is small. Together, they reveal that the plateau has been listening to climate for a very long time. As we move onward, the darker horizon below becomes clearer. It is another old soil, another pause in the fall of dust. The color warms, the texture changes, the imagined air becomes damp again. We are descending through alternating moods, and the Loess Plateau remains consistent in its inconsistency, always returning, always varying. This buried soil may have formed when summer monsoon influence was stronger, bringing more moisture to the region. Rainfall encouraged vegetation, weathering, and leaching. Dust may still have arrived, but soil processes kept pace or dominated. The surface became a place of transformation rather than simple accumulation. It was open, living, and slowly changing under sky. Imagine summer clouds gathering over the plateau. The light turns silver. Wind quiets before rain. The first drops touch dust and release that deep, earthy scent. Grasses darken. The surface accepts water with a softening sound. Some water travels downward, carrying dissolved minerals. Some rests near roots. The old soil begins another small increment of becoming. At night after rain, the air would feel cooler and fuller. The ground would hold moisture. The smell of Loess would be richer, less powdery. Insects might move quietly through the grass. The slope would be darker under the moon, and the gullies would hold cool air. The landscape would not be asleep, but its wakefulness would be very slow. The next dry spell would lighten the surface again. Crusts might form in exposed places, fine particles might loosen, plants would continue to hold what they could. The soil would remain a meeting place between mineral dust and weather. Over time, that meeting place became the band we now pass through, buried and still. There is something comforting about old weather becoming visible. Rain from a vanished season becomes color. Wind from a vanished year becomes thickness. Roots from a vanished surface become structure. The Loess Plateau lets past conditions remain near the body, not as dates or charts, but as earth tones and textures. We can rest inside that translation. Below this soil, we enter another bridge downward, and the Loess Plateau grows cooler around us again. The lighter Loess returns, pale and fine, with fewer signs of deep weathering. The scene feels more open, more exposed, more governed by wind. We can almost hear the dry hiss of grass and the soft brush of airborne silt against the land. The supply of dust depends on exposed fine sediment. In cold or dry periods, vegetation may retreat in source regions, leaving more material available. Rivers may deposit silt on floodplains that later dry. Glacial activity elsewhere may increase fine sediment production. The wind takes advantage of availability. It lifts what lies ready. The Loess Plateau receives what the atmosphere can carry. That readiness is important. The wind alone cannot make Loess without transport. The receiving land alone cannot make Loess without incoming dust. Formation requires a chain of conditions, each one quiet, each one necessary. The plateau is the result of many places and processes agreeing without intention. You can feel this chain as a slow movement through space. Rock breaks far away. Sediment dries. Wind rises. Dust travels. A slope slows the air. A grass blade catches a little. Rain settles it. More dust covers it. Time presses it gently into the body of the plateau. Nothing is isolated. Nothing happens alone. In the dark of the layer, mineral grains rest with their separate histories. Some may have been feldspar from a granitic rock. Some may be quartz from older sediments. Some may carry carbonate from dry basins. They meet here without knowing their origins. The Loess Plateau is a gathering of fragments made peaceful by distance, and as we pass deeper still, the plateau invites a quieter reflection on visibility. The most important events in Loess formation are often barely visible when they happen. A dust haze, a thin film, a slow darkening of soil, a shallow rill after rain. Yet after long time, these slight events produce a landscape so broad it can be seen across whole regions. This is a calm kind of grandeur. It does not tower sharply, it spreads. It does not shine brightly, it glows in muted earth colors. It does not insist on attention, it rewards it. The Loess Plateau feels ancient because it was made by processes that did not need to be noticed in order to continue. You can imagine yourself sitting at the rim of a gully near evening. The slope across from you is banded with soft yellow and brown. A light wind moves dust at the top. The lower channel is already shadowed. Your hands rest still. The air smells dry, with a faint memory of last rain. Nothing asks you to move. From that seated place, the formation of Loess becomes almost visible in reverse. The wall in front of you was once surface after surface. Each band had its day under sky. Each pale layer once arrived from the air. Each darker layer once held roots. The gully has opened the sequence, and the sequence has slowed your sense of time. Below this, we descend into the way Loess stands. Its vertical faces can look surprising because the material is so fine, but the fine grains, open structure, and weak cementation can support steep exposures under dry conditions. The walls do not feel like hard cliffs. They feel like compacted dust remembering how to hold a shape. Touch one in the imagination, and the surface may powder under your fingers. Yet the wall remains. It is not stone, but it is not loose dust either. It occupies an in-between state, held by contact, cohesion, and dryness. The Loess Plateau is full of such in-between qualities, soft and strong, young at the surface and ancient in depth. When moisture changes, the balance changes. Seepage may weaken a face. Rain may carve small grooves. Frost, roots, and gravity may loosen material. The wall retreats gradually. A fallen block may crumble into silt. The channel floor receives it. Later water may carry it away. The land continues its quiet rearrangement. You can hear that rearrangement as almost silence. A faint patter of grains, a soft slump after rain, a muted trickle in a channel, then stillness. The plateau does not need loud collapse to evolve. It can alter through minor changes, repeated across many walls and many seasons. The mind can rest with processes too slow to demand alarm. As we go further, the next buried soil comes into view, and the Loess Plateau turns again toward the memory of moisture. The darker layer may be thicker here, suggesting a longer or stronger period of soil formation. It feels denser, warmer, and more rooted than the pale loess around it. We enter it gently, as though stepping onto old ground. Imagine this surface before burial, covered with grasses under a softer climate. The air is not as dusty. Rain comes often enough to refresh the soil. Roots form a fine web. Organic matter gathers near the top. The earth has a scent like damp straw, minerals, and slow decay. It is a living skin over wind-laid sediment. Soil animals, microbes, and roots all help mix and alter the upper layer. Their work is small, but it changes structure and chemistry. Water helps move materials downward. The surface becomes differentiated into horizons, each with its own tone and texture. In time, the soil becomes recognizable as a distinct layer, a pause preserved between dust-rich episodes. You can rest with the thought of a pause becoming visible. Usually a pause leaves no trace. Here, it becomes a band in the earth. A time when dust slowed and soil deepened is now part of the plateau's architecture. The Loess Plateau shows that stillness can have structure. Waiting can become a layer, then dust returns, slowly at first perhaps, a thin coat over grass, a pale film after wind, more over the years until the soil surface is buried. Roots shift upward into newer material. The old soil falls into darkness. The active surface moves higher. The plateau thickens, carrying its former skin inside itself. This inward carrying feels deeply peaceful. We all hold former surfaces. Old seasons rest beneath present ones. They are not gone because they are no longer visible. The Loess Plateau gives that feeling a natural form, with buried soils stacked inside dust, each one a quiet reminder that life and weather leave traces even after being covered. Below the soil, we pass into another pale deposit, and the air in the imagination dries. The layer feels like a long winter of the land, though it may have formed over many seasons and climates. Fine grains dominate. The color lightens. Carbonate may be present. The texture returns to powdery smoothness. The Loess Plateau breathes dust again. A dry wind crossing the surface would pick up exposed particles most readily where vegetation was thin. It would carry them in suspension, saltation, and short bursts close to the ground. The smallest grains could remain aloft. When wind speed declined, or when obstacles disrupted flow, particles settled. The same basic physics, repeated endlessly, laid down the plateau's pale body. You can imagine the wind as a slow hand sorting weight. Heavier grains fall sooner. Finer grains travel farther. None of this happens with perfect order. Gusts vary, surfaces vary, moisture varies. But over long distances and long times, tendencies emerge. The Loess Plateau records these tendencies in grain size, thickness, and texture. The sensory world of deposition is subdued. The light is milky. The air feels dry against your lips. Dust softens the sound of footsteps. Grass moves with a faint whisper. The ground receives particles without making sound. A slope becomes a little smoother. A hollow becomes a little shallower. The land is being covered by weather you can barely hear. And as we move downward through this deposit, we find small pale nodules where carbonate gathered.
They may form as water dissolves carbonate from upper parts and reprecipitates it lower in the soil profile. In Loess sequences, such features can mark past movement of water. They are small, rounded, and quiet, like mineral pauses in the earth. You can picture one in your palm, chalky and light-colored against darker soil. It has no sharp beauty, but it belongs perfectly to the plateau. It formed without hurry as water moved through pores and left minerals behind. Even a nodule is a record of repetition, drop by drop, season by season, dissolution and return. The Loess Plateau is full of these modest forms. It does not rely on spectacle. Its wonders are granular, layered, and patient. A carbonate fleck, a root trace, a buried snail shell, a change in magnetic minerals, a gully wall glowing at sunset. Each detail is small enough to overlook, and together they make a natural wonder of extraordinary depth. As the descent continues, the next bridge leads us toward the surface again in memory, where the modern plateau still bears the marks of old formation. Ridges, gullies, and terraces reveal how the Loess body responds to present conditions. The next bridge leads us toward the surface again in memory, where the modern plateau still bears the marks of old formation. The edges are damp and darker. Tiny grains cling along the sides. The sound is gone now, but the path remains. This is how channels begin, in lines so small they seem temporary until they return. Over long time, returned lines become valleys. Valleys expose layers. Exposed layers teach the history of dust and soil. The Loess Plateau becomes readable because water has opened it. Again, the process is not hostile. It is simply the meeting of gravity, rain, and fine earth. The channel is the land's way of lowering itself, and as we sink away from the rill and into older deposits, the sound of surface water fades to a memory of movement through pores. Water in Loess is often held in fine spaces, drawn by capillary forces, moving slowly unless flow concentrates. This hidden moisture affects soil formation, plant growth, and stability. It is one of the quietest agents in the plateau. You can imagine a water film around a grain. It is too small to see, yet it changes chemistry. It carries ions. It softens contacts. It allows minerals to weather. It supports roots when present near the surface. Such tiny wetness is very different from flowing water in a channel, but both belong to the same cycle. The plateau knows both touch and current. When dry again, the pores hold air. That air allows roots and soil organisms to breathe. It also gives Loess its lightness and collapsible character in some conditions. Earth with air inside it feels different from dense clay or hard rock. The Loess Plateau is a landscape with hidden spaces, a thick body of ground that still contains breath. This hidden breath is a beautiful image for sleep. The room is quiet, but your own breath continues. The land is still, but its pores hold air. The surface is dark, but old light remains in color. Everything continues without effort. You do not need to manage the night. You can settle like dust into a place already prepared for stillness. Below this, the Loess Plateau becomes older again, and we drift into another sequence of pale and brown layers where the differences are subtle. Some bands may have formed under slightly stronger winds, some soils under slightly wetter climates. Some boundaries may be softened by later processes. Nature rarely draws with a ruler. It shades, blends, interrupts, and returns. This blending matters. A climate does not change in a single clean line everywhere at once. Vegetation responds gradually. Dust supply shifts. Rainfall varies by season and region. A layer can contain transitions within it. The Loess Plateau records not only states, but changes between states. Its softness is well suited to gradients. You can feel a gradient more easily than define it. The color warms by degrees. The texture firms slowly. The scent in imagination changes from dry powder to damp soil. The sound of wind gives way to the idea of rain. One mood enters another before the first has fully gone. This is how sleep often comes, not as a door closing, but as light lowering. In that lowered light, the plateau's long formation becomes almost a single slow movement. Dust rises elsewhere, wind carries it. The plateau receives it. Soil alters it, water cuts it, plants hold it.
Then dust returns. The order shifts, overlaps, repeats, and deepens. We are not traveling through separate chapters now, but through one continuous breath of land. And as we move through that breath, the Loess Plateau reminds us that dryness can be beautiful without being barren. Dry air sharpens the scent of mineral earth. Dry slopes show fine texture. Dry walls hold their shape in warm light. Sparse grasses reveal the contours of the land. The absence of lushness allows subtle forms to appear. In dry conditions, colors can seem clearer. Yellow loess, gray shadow, pale root, brown soil, faded grass. The palette is muted, yet not empty. Your eye can rest on it without strain. There are no violent contrasts. The landscape seems made for dusk, when everything becomes softer and the plateau's rounded forms begin to blend with the darkening sky. The wind in such dryness has a particular touch. It is light, slightly rough, and cool after sunset. It may carry the faintest taste of dust. It moves across cheeks and hands without demanding attention. It combs the grasses and loosens particles from exposed patches. The surface gives up a little of itself, then settles again. This giving up is not simply loss. Some dust lifted from one part of the plateau may settle elsewhere. Some may leave the region. Some may enter rivers. Movement and rest alternate. The Loess Plateau is not a closed container, but an open system. It has always exchanged material with air and water, with source regions and downstream places. You can hold that openness gently. Even a stable-looking landscape is part of movement. Even a sleeping body exchanges breath with the room. Even a quiet mind lets thoughts pass in and out. The plateau's calm does not come from being sealed. It comes from participating slowly in a larger world. Below this dry reflection, we enter another buried surface, and the mood softens toward moisture once more. The old soil in the Loess Plateau may show signs of stronger weathering, perhaps from a time of more effective rainfall or longer stability. Its color is deeper. Its structure is more developed. It feels like a long-held breath beneath the pale layers. If we imagine this ancient soil at twilight, it might be covered with low vegetation. The day's heat leaves the ground slowly. Moisture lingers near roots. The smell is rich compared with the dry loess above, though still mineral and restrained. Small living processes continue in darkness. The surface is quiet, but it is not inert. Soil formation transforms loess by reorganizing it. It adds organic matter. It changes minerals. It creates horizons. It develops aggregates that influence water movement and root penetration. These changes take patience. They cannot be rushed. The soil's character is earned by exposure and time. Then burial preserves that earned character as a layer. You can feel how different that is from a sudden deposit. A fresh loess layer is arrival. A soil is dwelling. The dust arrives, and then weather dwells with it. Roots dwell with it. The Loess Plateau is made of both arrival and dwelling, and the alternation gives it a deep, restful pulse. When dust covers the soil again, dwelling becomes memory. The active surface moves upward. The buried soil grows quiet. Yet the layer remains as evidence that the land once paused there long enough to change. You and I drift past it, and perhaps the mind takes comfort in knowing that pauses can be preserved inside change. As we descend again, the Loess Plateau becomes pale and dry around us. We are in the dust body once more. The grains are fine enough that the imagined wall feels smooth. There may be faint vertical cracks, small pores, and subtle variations in tone. Everything is understated. The beauty is in the almost, the slight, the barely seen. The plateau's deposits can be studied for their magnetic properties because weathering can form or alter tiny magnetic minerals in soils. Stronger soil formation may enhance certain signals. Dustier intervals may differ. These scientific readings help reconstruct past monsoon strength and climate shifts. But here, we can let the idea become simpler. The Earth's smallest minerals remember weather. There is poetry in that, though we say it calmly. A mineral too small to see can carry a trace of rain and warmth. A buried soil can hold a signal of a stronger summer monsoon. A pale layer can tell of colder, drier wind. The Loess Plateau speaks softly, through matter that most footsteps would never notice. You can imagine the scientist and the sleeper meeting in the same landscape. One looks closely and measures. The other listens loosely and rests. Both are forms of attention. The plateau allows both because it is generous in time. It does not hurry the person who studies it, and it does not hurry the person who dreams beside it. Below this layer, the next transition is faint. The color warms only gradually. A buried soil begins without a sharp boundary. This softness is important. The Loess Plateau often records gradual shifts, not sudden changes. The land adjusted as climate adjusted. Dust supply declined or moisture increased by degrees. Plants returned unevenly. Soil processes strengthened over time. We follow that gradual change with our breathing. The pale yellow becomes tan. The tan becomes brown. The powder becomes more structured. The dry scent becomes dampened in imagination. The sound of wind recedes, and the quiet of roots takes its place. There is no abrupt threshold. There is only the slow leaning of one world into another. This old soil may have held more clay than the Loess around it, due to weathering and translocation. Clay particles are finer, and they hold water differently.
They can give soil more cohesion and a smoother feel when moist. In the buried horizon, they become part of the record of long exposure to water and chemical change. If you touch moist clay-rich soil in thought, it feels cooler and more plastic than dry Loess. It holds the shape of pressure for a moment. It smells deeper after rain. Mixed within Loess-derived soil, it gives texture and body. The Loess Plateau contains these contrasts: powder and crumb, pore and aggregate, dryness and damp memory. And as we leave this soil, the downward journey opens again into wind-laid silt. But now the repetition feels even slower, like a tide beneath the earth. We have passed many former surfaces. Each one was once the present. Each one seemed complete in its time. Then dust came. Then soil formed. Then dust came again. This repeated burial gives the Loess Plateau its unusual value as a climate record. It is not only one episode of deposition. It is a sequence, a long archive of environmental change. The thickness and continuity allow patterns to appear. Yet beneath the scientific value, there is also a quiet emotional value. The land shows that change can be held without being solved. You can let that settle. The plateau does not choose between wind and rain. It keeps both. It does not choose between dryness and life. It records both. It does not reject erosion because erosion reveals. It does not reject burial because burial preserves. The Loess Plateau is patient enough to include opposing processes inside one calm form. At the surface, this inclusiveness appears as landscape: rounded ridges, incised gullies, broad slopes, pale walls, dark soil bands, grasses at the rim, dust in the air. None of these features alone explains the plateau. Together, they create its atmosphere. You and I remain within that atmosphere, drifting downward as if the land itself were a slow current. Below this, we enter another thick Loess band, and the air in the imagination becomes especially hushed. It is as if all the winds that made this layer have finished speaking and left only their sediment behind. The grains lie close together. The pores hold darkness. The color is soft and dry. This is the deep interior of settled dust. In such a layer, the original bedding may be subtle or massive, because Loess often accumulates as widespread, fairly uniform deposits. Yet faint variations can remain: a slight change in grain size, a thin soil film, a small carbonate concentration, a root trace from a brief stable interval. The Loess Plateau is never entirely plain, even when it seems so. You can look closely at the wall and find the smallest interruptions: a pinhole pore, a pale speck, a thread-like stain, a crumbly pocket. These details slow the mind because they require no urgency. They are there whether you notice them or not. They have waited through ages. They can wait while you breathe. The weight above this layer is greater than at the surface, but still gentle in our image. It presses grains into closer contact. It protects them from the quick changes of weather.
It keeps the old dust in darkness. The pressure is not crushing in the dramatic sense. It is simply the accumulated presence of everything that came later. That kind of pressure can feel comforting when imagined softly. A blanket has weight, a hill has weight, night has weight, the Loess Plateau rests under its own layers, and we rest under the quiet of the telling. Nothing sudden comes, nothing bright interrupts, only dust, time, moisture, and the long, slow movement of land. As we sink further, the plateau's connection to the wider atmosphere returns. Dust transport depends on wind strength, turbulence, surface dryness, and vegetation cover. During some periods, winds may have carried more material from northern and northwestern source areas. During others, moisture and plant cover reduced dust availability or trapped it differently. The layers record those shifting balances. Imagine the atmosphere as a broad, invisible river. It has currents, seasons, eddies, and paths. Fine sediment enters it where land is dry and exposed. It leaves it where air slows or rain washes it down or surfaces catch it. The Loess Plateau sits within that river of air, not submerged but brushed by it for ages. This aerial river is quieter than water in a channel. It has no banks you can see, yet over time it builds banks of its own, in the form of dust deposits. The air lays down a landscape. The thought is soft enough to dream with. A river of wind, a shore of silt, a plateau made from settling. Below this wind memory, another soil begins, and we move into it slowly, with no hard edge. The Loess Plateau warms in color again. This old surface may have developed under conditions that allowed more vegetation and less rapid dust accumulation. It is a sign of stability, not stillness. Stability here means that the surface stayed exposed long enough to be changed. You can picture years passing on that surface. Spring grasses rise. Summer rain darkens the earth. Autumn dries the stems. Winter winds move across the low cover. Some dust arrives, but not enough to bury the soil quickly. Roots keep working. Water keeps moving. Minerals keep altering. The surface stays itself long enough to deepen. A stable surface is a quiet achievement. It does not announce itself. It simply remains available to weather. The Loess Plateau's buried soils are records of such availability. They show times when the land was not just receiving new material, but becoming through what it had already received. There is patience within patience here. When the next dust-rich period begins, the stable surface is gradually covered. The old soil's work stops at the top and continues only faintly below. A new surface forms above it. Life moves upward. Time stacks itself. The Loess Plateau becomes thicker, and the former present becomes a band in the past. We drift through it without needing to name its age. And as we leave that band, the next pale Loess surrounds us with the feeling of long distance. Every particle traveled from somewhere. Some traveled far. Some traveled less far. All of them left an earlier resting place. The plateau is full of arrivals. It is a landscape made from elsewhere, and yet it belongs completely to itself. This is true of many natural places, but Loess makes it especially visible. It is not bedrock weathered only in place. It is not sediment laid only by a nearby stream. It is wind-borne, regionally gathered, and widely spread. The Loess Plateau is local earth made from traveling dust, a still place built by movement. You can feel that as a calm paradox. To arrive, the dust had to wander. To become stable, it had to move first. To form a plateau, countless particles had to leave other landscapes. The result is not restless. It is profoundly settled. Movement, given enough time, becomes rest. The same may be true of listening tonight. Thoughts have wandered through the day. They have crossed rooms, tasks, memories, and unfinished edges. Now they can settle. Each one finds a quieter hollow. Each one loses speed. The mind becomes a plateau of soft deposits. Not empty, but calm enough to hold what comes down. Below this, we pass into a layer where small ancient pores are especially easy to imagine. Loess is open compared with many compact sediments, and those openings matter to water, roots, and stability. Each pore is a tiny absence that helps the whole material function. The Loess Plateau is made not only of grains, but also of spaces between grains. Those spaces are part of the softness. They allow the deposit to feel light. They let water infiltrate. They hold air. They provide paths for roots near the surface. In deeper layers, they remain as small chambers of darkness. You cannot see them unaided, but you can imagine them, countless and quiet, like tiny rooms in the earth. A landscape with pores is a landscape with hidden pathways. Rainwater follows some. Air occupies others. Minerals move along wet films. Roots widen channels. When pores collapse or fill, the structure changes. The plateau's behavior depends on this invisible architecture. Even at large scale, the land is shaped by what happens in spaces too small to see. There is peace in thinking about hidden spaces. Not everything meaningful is solid. Not everything important is visible. The Loess Plateau's strength, weakness, fertility, and sensitivity all depend partly on openings within it. The quiet inside the earth is not nothing. It is room for change. As we sink onward, the old surfaces continue to pass by, and the Loess Plateau grows more dreamlike, because repetition has softened the boundaries of attention. Pale layer, brown layer, pale layer, brown layer. Each one is real, and yet together they become a slow pattern. We do not need to separate them sharply. We can let them move like breath. The scientific names might speak of Loess units and paleosol complexes, of glacial and interglacial intervals, of monsoon variations and sediment flux. These are useful words in daylight. At night, we can translate them into a simpler music. Dust during cold dryness, soil during warmer moisture, wind, rain, root. Burial, the same truth softened for the ear. You can imagine a cross-section of the plateau as a long, low song in earth colors. The pale notes are airy and dry. The darker notes are warm and rooted. Carbonate flecks are small rests. Gully cuts are openings in the music. The Loess Plateau does not sing loudly. It hums through the land, and as the next bridge carries us deeper, we approach the idea of ancient dust storms without turning them into drama. There were times when winds carried much more dust than on a quiet day. The sky may have dimmed, the air may have thickened. Yet even then, for our purposes, we hold the image gently, focusing on the settling afterward. After a dusty wind, the land is changed in the smallest way. Leaves wear a pale coat. Grass stems look faded. Stones lose their sharp color. The surface has a new film. The air clears slowly, and with clearing comes stillness. The dust that was suspended becomes part of the ground. The Loess Plateau grows by the aftermath of movement. You can feel the relief after wind drops. The ears notice quiet. The skin no longer feels the constant brush of particles. The horizon returns. The smell of dry earth remains. Evening comes over a newly powdered surface. This is where formation feels most peaceful, not in the lifting but in the settling. Settling is the central verb of Loess. Grains settle from air. Water settles into pores. Carbonates settle from solution. Slopes settle after disturbance. Thoughts settle during listening. The Loess Plateau is a vast meditation on settling, and we continue within it, layer by layer, as the night deepens around the words. Below this pale deposit, another darker soil receives us, and the old cycle repeats with a slower tone. The Loess Plateau is telling us again about exposure and transformation. The surface stayed open. Rain entered. Roots grew. Dust became soil. The color deepened. Later, burial came. The former surface became an inward horizon. This old soil may have been less dusty in its time, or simply more strongly altered between dust events. It may contain more organic traces, more clay formation, or more evidence of leaching. These details vary from place to place. The plateau is not a single perfect column. It is a region with many local expressions of the same broad rhythm. You can imagine moving sideways along this buried soil, following it through a wall. In one place it is thick, in another, thinner. Here it is sharply visible. There it fades. A small erosion surface cuts it. A later deposit covers the gap. The Loess Plateau's record is continuous in spirit.
but alive with local variation. That variation keeps the landscape natural. Perfect repetition would feel artificial. The plateau's beauty lies in repeated difference. Each dusty interval is not quite like the last. Each soil formed under its own balance of moisture, vegetation, and time. Each slope preserved or lost material in its own way. The land is patient, but never mechanical. As we leave the old soil, the next lowest layer carries us toward a colder feeling. The imagined air above its formation is open and dry. Winds pass over broad source regions. The plateau receives. Grains land on surfaces where plants are sparse and the ground is exposed. There is a sense of distance, like listening to weather from far away. The grains themselves may include heavier minerals in small amounts, offering clues about their origins. Some particles could have traveled from desert margins, alluvial deposits, or glacially influenced sediments. The exact mixture tells a story of source and transport, but for now, we let that complexity rest as an image of many distant lands becoming one soft deposit. A hillside does not show those origins at first glance. It only shows yellow earth. But inside the yellow earth are fragments of mountains, basins, river plains, and weathered rock. The Loess Plateau is a quiet gathering place for the broken fineness of other terrains. In its calm, many former landscapes lie together. You can imagine the dust arriving from beyond the horizon, so fine that the source is no longer visible in it. It has lost the shape of the rock it came from. It has lost the channel that once carried it. It has lost the glacier's pressure or the desert floor's exposure. Now it is simply Loess resting where wind let go. There is a mercy in that loss of sharp origin. Things can become softer after travel. They can belong somewhere new without denying where they came from. The plateau receives the grains without asking them to remain mountains or riverbeds. It lets them become ground. And as we descend further through the Loess Plateau, we enter another quiet consideration of time's thickness. The deposits are not merely old at the bottom and young at the top. They are layered with changing rates, interruptions, erosional gaps, and soil-forming pauses. Time here is thick but uneven, like a long breath, with places where it deepens. Some intervals may accumulate rapidly compared with others. Some surfaces may remain exposed longer. Some layers may be partially removed before new dust covers them. This does not make the record less beautiful. It makes it more like the real Earth, where processes overlap and no single rhythm controls everything forever. You can feel that unevenness without waking fully. Some breaths are deeper, some are shallow, some pauses last longer. Still, breathing continues. The Loess Plateau breathes in its own way through deposition, soil formation, erosion, and preservation. We are listening to the pattern rather than counting each part. The layers around us remain soft in color, pale tan, warm brown, faint gray, chalky white flecks, rusty hints where minerals weathered. These colors do not flash. They rest, they make a world of low contrast, ideal for the mind to drift through. Even the science seems quieter when painted in these earth tones. Below this, the next bridge opens into the relationship between Loess and temperature. Cold periods often helped produce and mobilize dust by reducing vegetation and increasing physical weathering in source areas. Warmer periods often favored soil development on the plateau. Temperature works through ice, plants, moisture, and wind, not as a single hand, but as part of a larger climate. Imagine cold air over an open landscape. The ground is firm, plants are sparse, fine sediment lies exposed, wind moves with a dry edge, dust rises and travels. Now imagine warmer, moister seasons returning. Grass is spread, rain enters, soil darkens. The Loess Plateau records both atmospheres, one as pale dust, the other as altered earth. You can feel cold and warmth as gentle contrasts. Cold makes the air clearer and drier in the lungs. Warm rain releases scent from soil. Cold wind carries particles over open ground. Warmth helps roots explore the surface. Neither is presented as danger here. They are simply modes of a climate breathing across long time. In this way, Loess formation connects the plateau to ice ages without needing ice on the plateau itself. Distant glaciation,
Regional aridity and atmospheric circulation all influence dust production and transport. The Loess Plateau receives the signature of these broader systems. It is a land archive of changes larger than its own hills. And as we move downward again, the idea of distance fades into the closeness of the wall beside us. We are back with touch, powder on skin, cool shade, fine pores, a buried root mark, a small carbonate nodule. The grand systems have become intimate details. That movement from vast to small is one of the plateau's quiet gifts. The mind can rest with a single detail now. A grain lodged beside another grain, it has no awareness of the climate that moved it. It simply rests. Around it, water has passed at times, minerals have touched it. More grains have accumulated above. The whole Loess Plateau can be approached through this one small point of stillness. Stay with that grain for a moment. It was once part of something larger. It became small. It traveled, it settled, it was covered. It is still here. No drama is needed. Its story is enough, because it is also the story of the plateau repeated beyond counting. Each grain a quiet syllable in a very long sentence of earth. As the next buried soil begins, we drift with it, and the Loess Plateau turns once more toward root, rain, and muted warmth. The surface that made this layer was open to the sky for long enough that weather could enter deeply. The dust was not merely covered by more dust, it was held in place and altered. Rainwater may have moved carbonates downward, leaving upper parts leached and lower parts enriched. Iron minerals may have weathered, clay may have formed, organic matter may have gathered near roots. These changes gave the soil a profile, a vertical arrangement within the former surface. The Loess Plateau holds profiles inside profiles, old ground inside newer ground. You can imagine the old soil as a quiet staircase of texture. Near the top, darker, root-rich material. Lower down, zones where minerals moved. Deeper still, less altered loess. Then later, all of it buried beneath another falling blanket. The surface becomes interior, and the staircase becomes a band visible only where erosion opens the wall. A gully wall is therefore not just a cut, it is a window into former skies. Every buried soil once faced upward. Every pale Loess layer once lay at the surface, at least briefly, before being covered. The Loess Plateau is full of old upward-facing worlds turned inward. You and I pass them gently, without disturbing their sleep. And as we leave this soil, the pale silt returns again, and the descent continues without conclusion. The Loess Plateau still stretches above and around us, layered in dust and ancient weather. The next grains wait in their quiet arrangement, and the old winds seem to move only as a memory through the fine, cool darkness. The fine, cool darkness holds steady now, and the old winds no longer seem to move at all. They have become part of the Loess Plateau, folded into pale silt, muted soil, and the soft weight of everything that settled after them. You can let your attention rest here without searching for another layer. The earth has already received enough for tonight. Around us, the grains are still. A little imagined dust clings to your fingers. The air has the dry scent of mineral ground. Though there is no breeze here, no open ridge, no sunlit gully, only the sheltered quiet of Loess resting beneath Loess. Above, the surface may cool under evening, grass may lean in a faint wind, a wall of yellow earth may hold the last light for a moment, then let it go. Down here, all that light is softened into memory. The old soils keep their darker warmth. The pale bands keep the hush of airfall. The tiny pores keep their hidden breath. Nothing asks to be lifted again. Nothing asks to be named. The plateau simply holds what time has given it. Grain by grain, through wind, rain, root, and stillness. So you may settle with it now, not falling, not drifting farther, only coming gently to rest inside the calm body of the land. The day above can loosen and pass away. The dust is quiet, the slopes are quiet, the ancient layers are quiet, and in the deep, soft keeping of the Loess Plateau, the last grain settles, and the night is still.